Hey, class, if you're looking at a screen, and if not, I'll post this map. This is the final position of the Allied armies in May of 1945, very, very quickly after the war in Europe had concluded. And note all the red in Eastern Europe. And the red in the Eastern Europe are the Soviet armies that are in Eastern Europe. And keep this in mind because we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about in this lecture, the Yalta Conference in February of 1945. And I just want you to note that by 1945, the Soviets, they had boots on the ground in Eastern Europe. And the big question for especially Poland, this was a major issue, and I'm going to talk about it in these podcasts. This was a major issue for Churchill. This was a major issue for Roosevelt. Is what would be the shape of the post-war world? And in the short run, Stalin, I have to say, wins this battle. He dominates Eastern Europe. The Soviets dominate Eastern Europe. They take over Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states, Romania, Yugoslavia, Hungary are all Soviet satellites until 1989, 1990, that period. And I kind of want to talk about the agreements that led to that, but the reality that really leads to it is just the overwhelming superiority of Soviet forces in Eastern Europe as the war ended. And the question really that then becomes is the US, is Great Britain willing to go to war with the Soviet Union to force the Soviets out of Eastern Europe? It would have been very tough politically for that to happen. Also, just the Soviet army at that point was on a roll, and it's kind of inconceivable that the U.S. and the British would have gone to war against the Soviets. Now, by August of 1945, the U.S. had atomic weapons, but then the question comes, well, if we bomb Soviet soldiers to free Poland, how many Poles are we going to kill by bombing Poland or Hungary or Czechoslovakia? How many innocent civilians would die? So we had, by August of 45, we had nuclear weapons we could have used against the Soviets, but at what cost to the people that we're supposedly trying to liberate? So I want to talk about the Yalta Conference in this series of lectures because it sets up the shape, the geography of post-World War Europe, and it's a very, very controversial event in World War II. So just to remind you of something that you know very well, that in 1943, in November, late November, early December 1943, the Allies met in Tehran, in Iran, and it was there that the decision was made to invade northern France. The U.S. and the Soviets side against Churchill, and Overlord is approved. And also at Tehran, Stalin makes noises, although he doesn't make a guarantee that he will enter the war against Japan after Germany is defeated. And this is something that's remarkable and it's easy to forget, but don't forget it. The Soviets were not at war with Japan until August of 1945. The Soviets had a neutrality pact with Japan, and the US and the British never forced their hand. So throughout 95% of the war, the Soviet Union is not at war with Japan. Only until the last couple of weeks of the war are the Soviets at war with Japan. And think about the context from Roosevelt's point of view, especially the US point of view. He's determined to get the Soviets to go to war against Japan because in February of 1945, when Yalta happens, the atomic bomb has not been exploded yet. It's not exploded until August of 1945. So Roosevelt doesn't have that ace in the hole by February of 1945. Things are going well with the production of the atomic bomb, but it has not been exploded yet. So Roosevelt's priority number one when he meets with Churchill and Stalin in February of 1945 is to make sure the Soviet Union guarantees to go to war against Japan, because it looks like the invasion of Japan, which is it was in the planning stages by February 45. It looked like the invasion of Japan was going to be an absolute bloodbath. And the US wanted to make sure that it didn't go into Japan alone. By that point, Great Britain's not really a factor in the Pacific War. They're a very minor factor. Whereas the Soviet army was going to invade Japan through Manchuria. And had there been an invasion of Japan, the Soviet army would have played a major role in the invasion of Japan. And just to be blunt, a lot of Soviet soldiers would have been killed invading Japan, not just US soldiers. So keep in mind that when Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt meet in Yalta in February of 1945, uppermost in Churchill's mind is to make sure that Stalin agrees to invade Japan. It's something that's very, very easy to forget. Also, keep in mind that the Soviet Union, the soldiers of the Soviet Union, they have rolled into Eastern Europe. They have boots on the ground in Eastern Europe. And to get them out of Eastern Europe would have required another war, which is kind of inconceivable to think about. I guess in theory it could have happened, but that's something nobody wanted. A third thing to think about when you're thinking about the end of the war and Stalin and the meeting at Yalta in 1945, February of 1945. With Stalin, the Allies, of course, are dealing with a ruthless enemy. We know all about Stalin way back in August. We read about the Ukraine famines. Stalin worked with the Allies for the most part during World War II. But Stalin's no day at the beach. Stalin has very, very powerful and strong and clear strategic objectives. And one of those, maybe the top strategic objective from his point of view, is he wants a buffer between Germany and the Soviet Union. He especially wants to control Poland. The Germans had invaded Russia twice in the 20th century through Poland. So from Stalin's point of view, he feels like he wants a buffer in Eastern Europe. He feels like the Soviet Union, having killed 8 out of 10 German soldiers, deserves a buffer. And so it's not so much that Stalin wants to expand communism per se, although, of course, after the war, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, etc., do become communist. But even if Stalin had not been a communist, I think any leader of Russia, or almost any leader of Russia, would have desired some kind of buffer in Eastern Europe between Germany and Russia and the Soviet Union. Although, of course, Stalin is more ruthless than most, and he does have the whole communist ideology that he pays lip service to. So this is the overall context that the Allies face when they meet in Yalta in February of 1945.